watching this on YouTube, then you can see my guests, Dan Szuc and Joe Wong from Hong Kong, which is why the timing is a little odd because I'm on the west coast of Canada. So patience with that. And if you are listening to the audio podcast on Acast, then you won't see the pictures, but you will know you can go and view both. Here we're talking about, or today we're talking about culture that works. And it's hard to not talk about, it's hard to talk about culture without talking about disengagement statistics. And because culture is a multi-layered thing, it's workplace related, it's global, it's national in terms of values and so forth. And so in this conversation, Dan and Joe, who are both UX consultants, have been in UX for user experience, for those of you that don't know the acronym, have been in this business for over 20 years. And of course, you can't help but do UX, new user experience, and notice what's going on in the environment. So we're talking about business culture today. Disengagement statistics are ridiculously high. If people were engaged, it would add, it would add something like 9.6 trillion to the economy. So not trivial. And so when companies say they're all about profit, if they're not paying attention to culture, they're not really about profit. There's something else going on. Dan and Joe, tell us what you've been doing and what you've observed in the workplace and why you're focusing on culture right now.
I will start with a little story that, so we've been doing the UX, our user experience consultancy for over 20 years. So starting from maybe 15 years into our consultant, we started to notice a lot of the times when we do projects and work with different people from different teams, or even with different vendors, we started to notice that people don't really work well together. And they don't really talk to each other or even don't care what others are doing. They only focus on their own KPIs. And because of the nature of our work, we need to work with quite a few different departments. So that's what we've seen. And at the same time, in our industry, we also involve in all these associations and from different parts of the world. And we started to notice we only care about ourselves as well. And we focus way too much on the tool set. And because the nature of our work is focused on humans. And one of the big things that we trying to promote to companies is the word empathy. But we tend to see that we are not really embodying it. We might do that to the customers or end users that we work with. But among ourselves, it's not that intentional. So we started to question this, and that leads to our journey of, after a few years of research, we started to have this question. How can we make meaningful work? Because we spend so much time at workplaces, and if we don't like it, or we don't even get along with people that we work with, it's not good for a lot of things, and one major thing is your health. Because when you're stressed, your immune system is taking the hit, and many people will get sick. So that leads us to the first book we wrote, which published in 2021, called Make Meaningful Work. So I'll leave the rest to you.
It's a very good introduction. Dawna, firstly, thank you for having us and accommodating with the time. if we could send you virtual and or real dumplings, we would do it now over the podcast.
Sounds good to me.
Yeah. I've yet to meet a person that doesn't love dumplings, especially homemade dumplings. So I'm going to take a little bit of a different route or angle with this, and do something that I don't often do, which is I'm kind of going to jump all the way to the end of a book, and which students love to do is like, what's the answer? What's the solution? What's the shortcut? I don't want to read everything. I just want to understand what I need to do. So I'm going to tackle it that way. And the reason I'm going to do that is not because I'm here to present the answer. It's rather to frame it as Joe and myself think about this a lot, maybe too much than we should. And we discuss it pretty much daily. I think it goes towards predominantly a very healthy relationship. So that's the framing. So let me get into it. I'm going to roll back to when I was in Form 1, Form 2 at school. And they introduced at my secondary school back in Melbourne, they introduced the subject of drama. And it was a completely different experience because suddenly we were not in a classroom, chairs and tables set up with the teacher at the front. We were asked to go to a cubicle, which was a standalone unit outside of the main building, and have our drama classes in there. And there were no tables and chairs in there. It was just floor and windows and a big space with a drama teacher. And the idea of removing those traditional structures of a classroom setting suddenly changed everything. Even without, like, we were very fortunate to have a fantastic drama teacher, but even without that, the whole environment completely changed the complexion of how we were going into that class and what we expected and assumed that class would be. And I took to it, I had done some very basic performing, like in kindergarten or maybe in some school plays, but this had a formality to it, and I really took to it like a fish to water. This is not a story about me and my performance and my acting, because I then went on to study. Because of that, my drama teacher went on to recommend me to do 4 years of professional theatre training at the National Theatre in Melbourne. But it's not about any of that, actually. That's just a precursor. Rather, the fast tracking is to say that what I learned through that and in being in professional theatre is that there are certain fundamentals that help that production be successful. And a lot of those fundamentals, a significant number of those fundamentals exist, but are not done well in business and government, not often. And so what are those fundamentals? I'm not going to list them out because there are hundreds, but I'll list out a couple of common ones or important ones that make for a better culture. The first one is that everybody understands the script. And that you're either given a script or you're given an opportunity to co-create or write a script. But at the end of the day, everybody understands the script. The second part of it is if independent of the role that you're playing, certainly as an actor, you have to learn the lines in the script. You actually have to understand your role in the script. And guess what? I mean, depending on the ego of the people involved, but let's say it's a relatively egoless people involved in the production, you also have to understand that it's not all about you. It's about you playing your role as part of that narrative, but in connecting it to a collective outcome, which is the success of the production. And then the third thing you realize, and final point fundamentally, is that it's not just about the hard skills. So the hard skills in, taking the time to learn the lines in the script. You also have these human skills, which are often referred to, we call them human skills in our new book, but they're often referred to as soft skills. And those soft skills or human skills are really important in not just delivering the process of putting on a play, but also in the way that people, and I'm using Joe's definition of culture here from our new book, Make Meaningful Culture, where culture is how people conduct, interact, and relate to each other in moments that matter, that form a conduct chain. And the fact that that's healthy, it's healthy by intention. And what I realized after that experience and having been part of some wonderful productions, and although not being as hyper aware of some of those fundamentals that I just outlined now, is that there's huge gaps when you actually get to work in some of the projects in either commercial or government or profit or non-profit. And I think that's in part, Joe's got very much understandably, and it's great, she's got very much a health interest. And I'm interested in that, obviously, but I've come from a different angle, from my fantastic experiences that I had in theatre and that type of work, and then brought that into what's culminated into the question of how we can make meaningful work, and then what's evolved into make meaningful culture.
So if we go back, sorry.
Introduction of book.
So that's very much part of the introduction, right?
Yeah.
That's my introduction.
So after the 2021 Make Meaningful Work book,
yes,
we just published the Make Meaningful Culture book on 1st of May this year.
yes,
and that I think after a few years of practice and try with different organizations and people, especially with kids, the new book, we make it more accessible and simpler to apply, and with a focus on culture, because we think it's really important at this time of our human progress, with all the technologies coming to us that's so accessible to us, that the human skills is more important.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's, for me, the soft skills are the so-called soft skills are the hardest to master because they demand all of you to be engaged. You can't just, pretend that authority is going to get you by. You really have to do the inner work. So it's a shift, I think, in leadership, the source of leadership, from manipulating the outer world into being grounded and centered in your inner world. And I know from watching actors, and just, when you were saying that earlier, Dan, I've often seen or do see the back end of movies where the entire cast is sitting around and they're each reading their part and seeing how that plays. And when you do that, I think you get a better feel for what's the chemistry, what's the quality of the conversation, how well do we connect on specific points, because you can watch something and it can be flat, like absolutely flat, and it's not engaging. But then you can watch something and there's emotion, there's passion, there's care, there's character as well, and it's completely engaging. And so when we look at what you've just described and you put it into the context of a world where we've got this ridiculously high level of disengagement, what are the doors that people and decision makers need to pay attention to? I mean, people meaning employees who are disengaged and they're just they're showing up for work, but sometimes barely. And in other instances, they're not showing up. It's an absenteeism thing. Or they're just checked out and started their own consult. I know of a number of people, young women in particular, who have just checked out of a world that doesn't make any sense at all, because it's all based on authority and not on listening to what's going on at all.
I agree, and that perhaps that wasn't caught, but that was part of the reason why I introduced it in that way, is because there's a big lead into years, probably decades worth of lead into the first book in Make Meaningful Work 2021. And then there's a gap in between we published Make Meaningful Culture in 2025. But there's a lot of things happening backstage. Pardon using that stage metaphor again, but there's a lot going on with Jo in terms of her intention. We talk a lot about intention, and a lot in her character that plays into what we're talking about in the question of how we can make meaningful work. And there's a lot in my background and my intention and how that plays into make meaningful work, and then for both of us, make meaningful for culture. And there's actually a third piece that we're going to be working on going forward, but we can talk about that throughout the conversation today. Yeah.
Okay, so when we talk about principles, when we talk about cultural principles, how do you, I mean, it's a combination of things here. Number one, there's, principles are sometimes beliefs. People confuse them with beliefs, and those are most often in religious contexts. So if we clarify that we're talking principles that are universal in nature, applicable in multiple places without that overlay, what have you found works for bringing people together and reconnecting those synapses that you mentioned earlier that have been broken through whether it's tech or, a combination of the COVID experience, or, what are the principles that unify versus divide?
No, you can go first.
So the foundation or the building blocks of culture that we think is how we interact with each other, and how what's the intention that you bring in when you interact with your colleagues. Is it only self-interest, or is it collective? That's so the collectiveness is healthier, because it's like Dan mentioned about the script, right, where everyone understands what we're trying to do here. So if everyone only focus on their own interests, the piece, or whether it's a music piece or it's a theater piece, as an analogy, you can't have a good outcome. And I think people know that you have a selfish and unhealthy intention going into the interactions, even as small as how you talk to people. That's why we use the word conduct. So how you conduct yourselves, especially in moments that matter, that's what we're trying to get people's attention to. Be more aware of your conduct, how you bring yourself into that situation, and make it a healthier, not as selfish interaction, basically.
So what this sounds like to me is that we're shifting from more of a, like what's in it for me consciousness to the we part of it. What is the goal there? So that's one dimension to it. Another dimension is, what are we really trying to achieve here? And I can remember a story from the construction sector, because I did a lot of facilitation in the construction, sector. And it was a story of a man, one man laying bricks, and somebody said, well, what are you doing? He says, I'm laying bricks. And then down the way a little bit was another man laying bricks, and they said, what are you doing? He says, I'm building a cathedral. It's the difference in thinking, in size and scope, that's a much more expansive way of perceiving your role in the world and your contribution to the world. And do you think, when you look at the disconnection that has taken place, where people aren't talking to each other anymore, do you think people have forgotten, or why they're working together? Is that part of this this unification of connection, or this I'm not sure how to call it, but it's just that whole business of, today I'm walking in the bush with a dog, and there's somebody walking a dog and they're in the forest and they're wearing earpods, blocked out, no idea. So they're missing all those beautiful alpha brainwaves that bring you back to a peaceful state. What's going on, do you think? What's your observation on that?
Would you like to go first? Go ahead. No, you go.
That's I think very much related to how we were educated. So growing up in Hong Kong, it's a very competitive school system. I don't know why. You just have to compete with your classmates. Even those people are your friends. You compete with your marks. You compete at exams. You compete in public exams that not everyone can get into universities. I think that framing has been in us for so long, and so naturally it's part of the muscle almost. That's how we frame things all the time. If we don't intentionally reframe how we think, we always approach things that way, with a very narrowed and self-interest approach.
Yeah, if we look at it through the consciousness lens, the bottom rungs of consciousness, the bottom three, are all related to, what's in it for me. They're all related to that. And how and we're not in an environment where that works anymore. It works in terms of coping strategies, but it doesn't work in terms of fulfillment, meaning, purpose, or tackling any of these large issues that we've got running around the planet today, where we need a different approach altogether. So
Yeah.
when in your work as UX consultants, as user experience consultants, have you seen or have you witnessed any places where there's just a catalyst waiting to be triggered? In other words, people are primed to do something, but the context they're in, the workplace that they're in, just doesn't serve the purpose. It's built on old stuff, built on old ideas of control or power over versus power with, which is one of the obvious markers. We can move from power over to moving cooperatively with others. It changes everything. Anything you've seen in particular in your work?
I think the way that you just described it is every single project. It's just a matter of degrees, and it's also a matter of whether Joe and myself are able to pick it up, observe it, see it, and then importantly, whether we want to do anything about it to action it, which is coming back to the fundamentals in the definition of culture, which is the conduct, interactions, and relationships between people in moments that matter, that form a meaningful or meaningless or anywhere in between conduct chain. But I think the damage of how people are conducting themselves at work has already been done way, way earlier, even before they join the workforce. People had generally effectively become industrialized by the time they had left or in kindergarten into primary school, secondary school, and then university. And so your role in general was you sit there quietly and you get lectured to, and then you've got dependency on whether you have a somewhat intelligent or quality version of a teacher, male or female, or anywhere in between. That's rare. And then whether you're in a position where are you actually just memorizing things, which in this part of the world some kids are very, very good at, or are you actually understanding and discussing and debating and talking about what it is that you're understanding to then implement it in a way through your own model of thinking via those conversations that actually make sense on something that exists, depending on the subject, or something that can be talked about that is malleable, that can be improved through the conversations that you have. But right now, I would say in general, it's leaning towards education, making humans just be more robotic. Now, here's the thing. Humans are now in for and going to continue to be shocked because now we have AI. Now, it sounds very cliche to just put that into the conversation, but it's not intended to be, because I've personally been studying this for the last year. Since starting the research for our new book on Make Meaningful Culture, I've been interested in how to use AI as a co-writer or a co-researcher in this, not to write for things that we don't know, but to inform AI as a buddy for things we do know and to see where it can help. And I must say, throughout my research, I found that AI is incredibly childlike and quite novice in many respects. It doesn't get to a lot of depth. Now, I guess it may depend very much on the topic and very much in what's in their large language models and so on and so forth. But it will change. And the major part of that change and improvement, and this is the part that we're very interested in researching now, the third book, which is Make Meaningful Work, Make Meaningful Culture, and third book, drum roll, Make Meaningful Education, which is to say that education needs to be revamped, rethought of, reframed, restructured, relooked at in what it means to be in the role of an educator. An educator, by Joe's definition, meaning role of an educator as a parent, role of an educator as a kid, role of an educator as a teacher, as a principal, as administrator, the notion of a collected, distributed, meaningful peer-to-peer education, where we're not to be scared of the machine and we're not to be scared of the algorithms and AI, but to look at it as, what does it now mean, coming back to the human skill, to be more human than ever. And right now, to conclude, what we have within education and within corporates is it's going the other way. The humans are becoming increasingly robotic. It's by no mistake. They are predominantly process-driven, which is by no mistake. They are predominantly following measures to do with productivity and other KPIs, which is continuing to make them machine-like, which is also by no mistake. And it's not playing out so well locally and globally. So there are, in reference to the conduct chain, which could also be connected to supply chains, there's some pretty significant improvement that needs to be made, which comes back to the definition of Joe's definition of culture, of how we conduct, how we interact, and how we relate to each other in moments that matter, to move us from what was on the original first book, cover of the first book, to move us from sleepwalking to sparkle.
Right. So what's interesting for me about this is that there's an element of choice that people have around their relationship to AI. And I've heard some young people in their early 20s sort of say, oh, well, it's there to replace us. Oh my gosh, that's scary. So I think what happens out of all of this that you're referring to is to be much more going back to Joe's word, intentional. You've got to be really clear about what you're responding to, and really clear about what's driving your decisions. Because, and I'm a big, as everyone knows, at least people who have been listening to my work, clarity and consciousness around your decision making is it is the portal for making a difference. It's the portal for meaning and purpose. So, I think when I think about this whole relationship with AI, we're not ahead. We're behind, and it's by choice. It's by choice to kick back and not engage with our own agency, our own sense of control, our own initiative, and then moving forward, with the vision that we might hold for what our place in the world is. So, yeah, thank you.
And you're welcome. And that's why, by intention, I was aware of your first question in connection to our history, but I intentionally brought up the drama story, which really was about me, but wasn't about me. What that's really playing into was there was a very clear intention around the story that we and the narrative that we were all part of to produce something together. And I have found now that I can talk about that more intentionally as relating to question of make meaningful work, make meaningful culture, and what will be the third book, and maybe further, but make meaningful education, is what we're finding is a considerable amount of adults and certainly children don't have their own story. They don't have their own narrative. They don't know what they're about. They don't know why they're doing what they're doing. They don't have a sense of what values they believe in and why. And it's also what's propagating the problem is short-termism and short attention spans by design, as a relate of constantly being on their phones or their computers, where it's flicking, social media. It's all related.
Yeah.
So in the work we're doing with children at the moment, and have done for years now, when we run our studios, you can see the results. You can see the results via our facilitation, and we're not even doing anything that's rocket science or that difficult, but it's rather just bringing them back to what it means to interact, and relate to each other in moments that matter, in the producing of something, but it's the same thing, and to feel that connection together and to act out that connection practically. So a lot of what we talk about in our first two books is not theoretical. It's highly, highly practical, and there are very small and short-term ways that you can do it, minute by minute, hour by hour, and daily, and weekly, and monthly, and yearly in what you do.
I want to build off of that, if I may, because when we talk about education, it's long-term. We think about it in terms of 12 years, 14, whatever the parameters are in every country. But it's learning that I think, it is more ubiquitous. It's something that it's driven by curiosity. It's in the moment. It's situational opportunities. You don't have to wait for to enroll in anything or watch YouTube to get your video, to learn your skill set. Learning is something that we can do when we're sitting across from somebody we don't know. They're different than you or I might be. But that's perfect, because that's when you can ask the question, tell me what matters to you. And I've had some conversations with some people that scared me half to death. I mean, sitting across from a teenager with a mohawk and wearing a switchblade and chains and all of that stuff. And you're going, whoa. But it was the most revealing conversation I've ever had, because, well, I shouldn't say that. I've had lots of incredible conversations. But what came out of that one was, here's somebody who's highly sensitive, and he's got armor on him, like up the wazoo. And so it was just getting behind the armor and learning from that I found rich. And so I think when we're talking about education, we're actually, if we bring it, if we strip off the structural aspects of education, we're looking at how do we learn, and how many ways can we learn from each other. That is a rich playing field in my world.
Agree.
I think why we started with work, and then our next book is on education, is we can see that why the things happening at work happened because we were never taught at school. So the engagement part that you started with is very much connected to what we see at schools. Kids they don't need to take responsibility of their own stories, what they want to do, what they enjoy to do, or where they want to go. Two stories. If we ask kids, whether it's in primary school or secondary school, what do they want to be when they grow up, they can like say, oh yeah, I want to be a scientist, I want to be a pilot, I want to be a teacher, or whatever. But when you ask the follow-up questions, why do you want to become a pilot or whatever, what do you want to contribute? So that's more a collective question. So what do you want to be is a self-interest question. And I don't think I've ever been asked at school that what do you want to contribute. So since we were little, we were not intentionally probe about the collectiveness, right? So that's the first story. And the second story is, so we run our studio as a production, so kids can have fun and learn things, but they have to perform a show. So last week we were rehearsing on the stage, and when they line up to go home, someone dropped the water bottle, and the girl was just saying to the teacher, "That's not mine," and then ran away. And the teacher's first reaction was to pick it up for her and then ask whose the water bottle is. So Dan saw that and stopped the whole situation, like, pause. Even it's not yours, saying to the schoolgirl that you can pick it up and ask who that is, right? It should be someone that either before you or behind you, right? It's right next to her. So the idea and the concept and the awareness of the collectiveness is just not there. Everything is about me, 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 me. How can you be engaged with others?
You know, it's interesting. I mentioned at the beginning that I did a little search on Perplexity on disengagement and whatnot. And one of the things it mentions is avoidance. It mentions it in terms of uncertainty avoidance, which is really high risk because there's nothing certain about the trajectory we're on at the planetary level. And so the whole business of avoidance, when you mention that story, Joe, the first thing that I think of, it's like responsibility avoidance. The operative word is avoidance. I don't want to pick up after somebody else because that's their thing. This is something that if there's a way that humanity will shoot itself in the foot, that would be it. It would be by avoiding everything that would lead to growth, that would lead to meaning and purpose, and to a much higher level, I think, of functionality that we could possibly attain as a species, as human beings.
And you see that a lot at workplaces too.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, there's this whole thing about the work being process driven. And that means that they're not stepping back and looking at seeing. So I can remember, this was years ago. I mean, I was chatting, I went to a social function, which for someone like me is kind of, an anxiety ridden deal. I'm just terrified. But at the same time, I learn stuff. So I go and I'm talking to a salesperson, and she said to me, they've introduced a new process. And if I do absolutely nothing this year, like nothing, I go on vacation for the year, I'll make a penny less than I did last year. She did the math. And I thought, wow, that means that they've reinvented the process on an annual basis, purely out of habit, but not without a clue what the outcome is or what the dynamics are that gets generated by the process they put in place. So if you look at process addiction as a cultural affliction, as a cultural disease, any thoughts on how you might, as user experience designers, how you might unhinge that addiction and just say, let's just make this more human, 100% more human? Any thoughts? Dan, I know you keep looking at Joe. By the way, for those of you who are listening to the audio, it's great. It's very entertaining when you've got two people on the other side and each one of them are making the decision on, is it me? Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'll start with Sparkle, in part to promote Sparkle, and also I think it sounds pretty good with the Aussie accent when you say Sparkle. the acronym, it now stands for S for supportive, P for proactive, A for adaptable, adaptive, R for respectful, K for kind, L for listening, and E for engaged. And so you could take any of those as a starting point, or pick one, and then begin to reference the question that you asked. I think that if part of the framing is that we have somehow all, without us knowing, been indoctrinated or immersed into an industrial system, which is very mechanical and machine-like, without that language being used or without knowing it, but somewhat by design, and where the community or the collective aspects of that have started to erode big time, and where capital interests have taken over, where it's less about people and more about profit and money at the expense of people and certainly the environment. This is certainly influenced by Joe on me after 26 years. We've got a problem, and it's playing out today. So to oversimplify, you can tackle it in two ways. One is that you can have people talk about systems, and we know plenty of people, including you, Dawna, who are very astute and have the ability to talk about systems and unpack it through different lenses and different dimensions in different ways. Or to talk about the word change is a very common word, or transformation is another. But sometimes the problem when we take these systemic views is, or when we go to conferences and we listen to fantastic people giving keynotes or presentations, the feeling in the audience, where it's often very little, next to no interaction with the people in the audience. And I'm not talking about seminars or workshops. I'm talking about conferences, or even on Zoom calls, or even on online educational events or presentations. The people are not engaged in it. They're not interacting with what's going on, and it doesn't lead to any dialogue. It doesn't lead to any real communication or conversation between people. So I think that the simplest way to do it often is just to be curious, and to be supportive, and to be proactive, and to be adaptable, and to be respectful, and to be kind, and to listen, and to engage. And I have found for myself, and certainly I have observed with others, in terms of the inherent bias that we have, that's some of the hardest things to shift, because it's a lot easier to say, oh, that particular race thinks like that, or that particular culture thinks like that, or that particular country's like that, because that's what I see on the news, or that particular department, or all engineers are boring and all they know is how to code. And it keeps going and going. Whereas what you can do is just show a little bit of interest in another person, be a bit curious, or say to your wife or your colleague, say, you go first, right? To practice the R part of Sparkle by embodiment. And usually I have found that when you allow that to happen, and you're intentional for that to happen in the most fundamental part of our definition, which is interactions, tends to play out very, very well. Tends to play out really well, actually.
Yeah, it does. I totally agree with that. Absolutely. So if there is something that we could leave people with, given the real need to tackle culture, and not to avoid the hard questions, and not to avoid the responsibility associated with creating workplaces that work, what thoughts do you have on direction?
Direction in terms of
People who are listening, for example, what can they do?
All right.
Regardless of their role, this is something that the self-responsibility is sort of like the source point.
Yeah.
What can people do in order to take charge of their own engagement with what's going on in the world?
It's a very good question to conclude, I think. When we talk to people about culture, usually people will say, "Oh, that's the leader's responsibility." It's partially true. Yeah, it's not. It's not. I can't do anything about it because we had a session with someone last week. It's the same thing. Because I'm in this situation, I can't do anything. Because my colleagues behaves this way, I can't do much, which is not true, and it goes back to the taking responsibility part and thinking about the collective part that we were talking about. So it goes back. So it goes back to the definition of culture. It's how you conduct yourselves in the interactions, because you have interactions with your colleagues every day, whether you're individual contributor or your leaders or managers. And these interactions help you to build healthier relationship or towards more toxic relationship. So in moments that matter, the intention of how you behave, how you conduct yourselves when you interact in a very small way matters a lot. We were talking to someone the other day. Someone was, saying that the boss always scream at them and have these authoritative way of communicating or more towards the abusive type of verbal communicating. And we were talking about, so as the middle manager, do you so your conduct when you interact with your team, do you pass that conduct chain? That's why it's a chain. Do you pass your boss's conduct to your team? That's your decision. That's your intentional decision. Or you decide or not and do something else. It can be the same message but delivered in another way, and build the relationship of your team together. So everybody has a role, because how you react to these bad behaviors or good behaviors that you want to pass it on, it's up to you. You need to take the responsibility and ownership. And if you're aware of it and it be intentional, that's how you shape the culture you want.
Yeah, good point. I know that I've worked in the past, a long time ago, with toxic buffers. A manager that had decided to place themselves and buffer all the nonsense coming from the top. Now, that's a pretty costly, from a health point of view, strategy. But if you have the mechanisms, the coping strategies, the wellness idea, education in place, it can be done. But it's just ridiculously dumb, I think, to have to be buffering toxins from the top when the top could simply be part of the solution instead. So I think overall, what we're talking about here and what you're putting forward is an opportunity to improve the quality of the conversations, improve the quality of the responsibility that we each have for who we are when we come in and bring ourselves into a particular context or conversation. I think there's that. And then I would, certainly from my point of view, I would say step back a bunch and just take a look at the dynamic, because this is where shifting perspective, an eagle eye view, whatever metaphor you need to be able to observe what you're engaged in, and then make a decision that's got some perspective shifting involved, so that you can move forward in a healthier way. Any thoughts you want to add before we close down?
In reference to the last question, or just in general?
In general.
Yeah, I just as Joe was sharing, I was thinking back to something that happened with the kids in our studio recently, and to me, you know, whether they're kids or adults, it's just all about human conduct, to use our language at the end of the day. And I really think that our early life experiences, if you're lucky enough to have education, our early life experiences are very much influenced by that, by the teachers and the kids that we interact with at school, equal to, if perhaps even more important than the home life that we have, and then all of the extracurricular activity. And we see it firsthand. We see it with kids, how robotic they can become so quickly, so passive. Now, it's not that process and doing some tasks robotically doesn't have a place. I mean, for example, if I get the handheld vacuum cleaner at home and give the home a quick vacuum, to me that doesn't necessarily feel like the most exciting activity in the world, although I can bring particular conduct and a particular mindset and attitude that I'm not huffing and puffing around the house vacuuming. I'm doing it with at least neutral, or if somewhat a little bit of glee in doing that. But the education system has this habit of where the kids become so passive in certain parts of the world that they're constantly waiting to being told what to do. So a couple of weeks ago, what happened was we had our bump in for the show that we're doing, and these kids are 8, 9, 10-year-olds roughly. Some are 7. Most of them 8, 9, 10. And we were setting up the first scene, and we had forgotten to set the stage right for the first scene, and a couple of kids put their hand up and paused before we jumped into it, and mentioned that the stage wasn't set correctly. Now, it sounds like such a small thing, but it's really a big thing. It's a small and a big thing, because what had happened is, after years of working with us and through our own conduct, interactions and relationships, and our own mindset and attitude and our own intention and the way that we, for lack of a better word, facilitate these sessions, these kids had grown a confidence and grown a trust and grown an energy to say, look, this is our production too. This is not, we're being told to read a script and told to make, which is what work, the point I'm trying to make is, work feels like that for a lot of people. They don't feel connected to their work. They understandably just look at it as a wage, a salary, which has got merit, obviously, and fair enough. But what I loved about that was, and Joe pointed it out, was they were on the front foot. They took ownership of it. They felt responsibility for the collective success of what we were doing. And the way we look at it, to conclude, is it's going to be a great show. It always is, in terms of the heart, where I started all of this, in terms of the hard skills and the process. But what we're really going for is, what are we seeing in the collective equal to the energy and the measure of that energy associated with what we're all doing together.
How they engaged.
And how aware and how engaged they are. And there's nothing better, Dawna, when you see that in teams and in society. It's just marvelous. Absolutely marvelous. And obviously there's a lot of philosophy that underpins that, and depending on how you grew up and where you stand. But I know for the two of us, people can't see this because it's audio and not video. I'm pointing to Joe and myself. We're obviously very invested in what it means for the collective good and the collective health of people and planet.
You know, another way for me, as you're describing that, is that this collective and shared responsibility for making a good production is a metaphor for how we guide ourselves in the planet, you know, on the planet as a whole. If we look at how we share responsibility for creating a world that works, then for all species. I know we, you know, a number of times we just, the world that works for all humans. No. We're not contributing much except for a lot of destruction. it is all species, because without those species, we don't have much to stand on in terms of biosphere diversity and so on and so forth. So Dan and Joe, can you give us a quick feeling for where do people get your book, and anything else you'd like to add quickly?
Yeah, well, I'll kick this off. Make Meaningful Work is available on Amazon. That's the primary place you can go. There are other suppliers, I think, that you can get the Make Meaningful Workbook from. Make Meaningful Culture is also available primarily on Amazon. So, and it's available in most markets, but certainly on the US site. And then going forward, Make Meaningful Education should be available within the year. But I have been known to miss targets, so we'll see how we go. But I'm most excited about that one. And then if you want to learn more about what we're working on the UX, user experience side of things, you can go to apogeehk.com, APOGEE, that's E for egg, sorry for the Aussie accent, APO, A for Apple, APOGEEHK.com. Or if you want to learn more about Make Meaningful Work and Make Meaningful Culture, and also the Sparkle Studio that we do for kids, you can go to www.makemeaningfulwork.com. Joe?
The only thing I want to add is you have power. Just be more aware of it and be more intentional how you frame things, and the mindset and attitude can affect your choices.
And Dawna, by the way, Joe made me think. Final thing, I promise, is we are on LinkedIn. Josephine Wong on LinkedIn, as you are, Dawna. I think you're on LinkedIn. Is that correct?
Yes. Oh yes, yeah,
yeah. And I'm also on LinkedIn. I have the advantage of there's only one Daniel Szuc on LinkedIn, so I'm easy to find. And what we're doing now on LinkedIn is we have a newsletter, which has become very popular, and we're publishing clips and articles to that. And we also have a Make Meaningful Work group on LinkedIn. There's a pretty sizable community on there now, and that's really a great way to engage and get involved in these types of questions and themes and topic, because they're hard. But they're not impossible. But I think thanks to you, Dawna, for today. That's certainly one way of many we can continue to reframe what we want work to be and what we wish to the planet to be, in your words, for all species, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you, and thank you to our listeners as well. Really appreciate your support. These are hard questions, and these are things that we need to do, but avoiding is obviously not going to be the way to do it. So Dan and Joe, thank you very much for being on the program, and I'll clean up the show notes and put the links in shortly, and also on the watch for the podcast on Acast. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dawna.